that is one of the most amazing things about music, is the way that our brains respond to those mathematical vibrational relationships. There was a thing I was trying to do. I was trying to design a sound. Now I don't design sounds very often, as you know. I'm a preset junkie these days, having spent a couple of decades having to design my own sounds. The fact that there's just a plethora of presets out there is great for me. But there's a modular system which I think is really good, called Karma FX. I'd really recommend it. I couldn't find a cracked version of it, so I had to buy it. Which I think I got it on sale somewhere. I think I paid about 48 quid for it. And I was trying to design a sound. And what I wanted to do was to demonstrate how rhythm relates to harmony. Because if you slow down a note enough, it eventually becomes a rhythm. And that
I was going to say that.
That happens around 40 hertz. 40 hertz is the nominal default resting state for most humans. Most humans are operating around 40 hertz in some way that's not fully understood. And you can experiment with this. If you get a synthesizer and you can take a square wave or something like that, something that has a bit of impact, not a sine wave, it won't work, but a square wave, and you turn it right down, it's a note. And then as you go down and down and down and down, eventually it will become a rhythm. But the tricky part is, when did it become the rhythm? Because by the time you notice it, it's been the rhythm for a bit. But if you go back up the way, it becomes a note. But again, you don't quite know when it became the note. And if you map that out, there's a zone somewhere between 30 and 60 hertz, depending how you're listening, where you can't tell what it is. It's one or the other, but it's never both. So I wanted a sound that where I could demonstrate that. So let's say that you don't play one note, you play two notes. So you play the note and you play the fifth. So you've got a standard major harmony. Could be a minor harmony, depends what you do with it, but it's the standard major harmony. And you turn that down. What happens then? Well, then you get a rhythm. You get this, I can't do it because I don't know it, but it's a rhythm, a recognizable rhythm. So then fling in the third, right, and you get another rhythm. Then fling in the flattened third to make the minor, and you get another rhythm. But those rhythms, when that note is turned all the way down, become harmony when you switch them up. They're recognizable rhythms and recognizable harmonies, but they're the same thing, just faster. Mm-hmm. I find that fascinating. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to get a tool where I could do that. Sadly, the tool's not accurate enough because it doesn't track your finger presses accurately enough. I would need to do, I'm still thinking about how to do it, but I would need to construct it myself because the synchronization isn't good enough in the tool. The tool's lagging essentially and not creating the right rhythms. Although it's good at the harmony. The harmony's fine, but when you slow it down, the rhythms don't come out the way I would expect them to. But Karma FX is a good modular system because he's the guy who designed it, and the manual is written for people like me. It just goes through it, everything in order, which I love. So many manuals are just written by idiots. This is obviously a guy who thinks the same way I do. He's designed a brilliant bit of software, designed a brilliant manual to go with it, and it's a wonderful modular system because unlike most modular systems that replicate the real world, he's done away with a lot of the patching that you would need to do in the real world. The Eurorack kind of stuff that, VCV emulates that, and you have to attach all these patch cables before you even start making sound. This guy's sussed that out. Well, you always need to attach those, don't you? Because you won't get a sound unless you attach those things. So I'll just do that in the background and let the user get on with making proper sounds. So I have been doing some weird experiments in that regard. I haven't quite solved it, but I will get there with it. But it's fascinating. The mathematical nature of it, of the way that music works, is utterly fascinating and compelling, and I think quite mysterious.
Well, it is. That's I was thinking about this yesterday, and I've been thinking this is something that's been fogging my mind for the better part of 3 years now. when it comes to this stuff. And I'm going to mention a few things. I tried to make some notes here while you're talking because it hit on a lot of things. Like first off, like I started getting into thinking about frequency modulation and this frequency relation from rhythm to sound and like all spectrums of it, and just beyond music, about how like, you know, everything's a frequency, everything's fractal, you know, not just music, but like we're fractal beings, you know, and like the atoms and the cells we're made up of look the same as the biggest things in the universe, you know, like it all kind of does this weird like accordion thing, you know, and like that. Like there's that band I think I've may mentioned to you before, and I'll mention them again. The Horse Lords. They're a band that like they on their second last album called The Common Task. I forget what song it is. It's the second, maybe the first song, because their songs are long. They're like 8 minutes long, and you can never tell what song you're in because they just take you on these weird journeys. And there's a spot where they do that. They have a snare drum sound that I can't remember which way it goes, up or down, but it starts off as a tone and then slows down. And you realize it's just a snare drum sample being played. So it starts off like like a really high pitched tone, and it comes down to like and you realize it's a snare drum, and you're like, holy shit! Or it does the other way around, right? And it makes you think about that kind of stuff. But like when Sterling passed away, there I went a little crazy, you know. Not that I've always feel like I'm a little mad, but I went like Mad Hatter mad for a bit, and I spent a lot of time in my studio, like in my underwear, doing weird things, like because my clothes were making too much noise, right? So I was like, I was recording very quiet sounds, and I was doing all the cymbal bows and everything, and I started having these like bizarre, like almost psychotic thoughts that, you know, like you and I are no different. You and I are part of you and I are just like two keys on the piano. Like we just don't realize it, you know. And I was realizing that we just vibrate at different frequencies. That's what makes us think we're different, but we're, you know. And I was having this like, I was having a hard time consciously distinguishing between sound and objects and ideas. Like it was all kind of bubbling into this one frequency. And that's how I was seeing music, and I was seeing everything this way. And it was comforting to me because I was able to get away from my grief and think about, like, I thought like, well, my son didn't die. Like the frequency changed, you know, like, and then I'm just farther down the river. He's stuck back up there and I'll never see him again, you know, but, you know, and it's hard to think that way sometimes, but it became this thing, you know. And then around the same time, I saw a video on YouTube of Adam Neely, the bass player from New York. He did a video on fractal music, and he was taking recordings of John Coltrane saxophone solos and speeding them up like 2,000 times. And if you do that, it's the same thing. Like he would go through all these weird rhythmic changes and mutations, and eventually the same notes started repeating themselves again. And then he'd do the same thing back down as well, and they would do the same thing, you know. And it was like, it was fucking my head up, like to see like that, like these frequencies, they're cyclic, right? And that, you know, and they will eventually come back around if you push them into certain directions. And it was, I don't know, it was really weird, you know. And that's why like I realize how little importance we give to frequency. Yet frequency is like the basis of everything. Like we talk about voids in space and orbiting things and gravity and whatnot, but without frequency, none of this exists. You know, and it's a weird thing to think, because I remember one time, around that same time, I was trying to describe these ideas and thoughts I was having, because I invited a few of my mushroom friends over. Drew was one of them, and we were sitting around eating mushrooms, listening to records, and I just bought my first synthesizer a few months before that when I was going through all this weird shit, and I said, hey guys, I want to show you some music I've been making on my synthesizer. And I played them that song, Spiritually Dismantled by a Car Salesman. And they were all fucking like freaking out. They're like, what in the hell, man? Like, you just made that with that little box. That's just you turning knobs and like making notes and recording yourself over and over again. And I'm like, yeah, that's what that is, you know. And I started talking about these thoughts I was having about frequency and whatnot, and trying to let them know that like these thoughts I'm having, these thoughts exist inside your head too. And you just haven't, like, it's like our brain's a vacuum, and we're just kind of like exploring territory that's already existed for everybody, you know. And they weren't getting it. Like they were having like this, like they're looking at me like, Chris, you've gone off the deep end. The music sounds great, but like, holy shit, man, you gotta find a way to like sort of like ground yourself here. And I was talking about, you know, the frequency of everything, and how when people say frequency, they're talking about pitch. I said, but what you really mean is how many times it's happening in a second, right? And I was trying to explain to them. I said, like, the synthesizer made me realize how scientific a synthesizer was, right? Because when I saw a knob that said filter on it, or I saw cutoff, or I saw like LFO, like I thought these were just stupid terms I had to learn. right? Like I just thought this is just some sort of a club I got to figure out the fucking handshake to get into.
Yeah.
But then once I started realizing that like every phrase, every term on these synthesizers is scientific.
Yeah.
Right? They call it an oscillator because it's oscillating frequencies, not because it's some stupid name they came up with. You know, so I was talking about it, and I remember like we were talking about like pitch and depth, and then eventually the conversation got on to like who's got the deepest voice in the room. Some stupid conversation, right? And you know, and I have like I have a rich voice, but I don't have a super deep voice, but I have a rich, like good for radio voice. But the one guy in the room could bring his voice like real deep, like a like a movie, like doing the movie theater thing.
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
And we're all competing who can make the lowest note with their voice, right? So everybody made their lowest note. I said, well, let me try once more, guys. And they're like, okay, how low can you go? And I went, I started making these ticking noises every 2 seconds. And they're like, what are you doing? I said, well, that's like half, that's like 0.5 of a frequency. Like that's so low, it's inaudible.
Yeah.
And they're like, you're just making ticking noises with your mouth. I said, okay, let's turn the synthesizer on. And I played the lowest note of the keyboard and like bent the tuning knob down. And it was like, and it was making the same noise I was making. I said, that's as low as my keyboard can go. You know, and they're like, you fucking prick. Like who does that kind of shit, you know? And I'm like, I'm trying to show you guys where my mind is right now. I'm trying to explain to you about the frequencies, man. You're not getting it, you know? And that's when I realized, again, like when you're trying to describe ineffable things or things that are like beyond, like it's hard to find the words sometimes, at least for me, because I don't have the vocabulary and the knowledge enough to describe it eloquently enough for someone to understand it beyond maybe it was just crazy ideas. But when you realize, like when you look at a Mandelbrot zoom, you ever watch those videos on YouTube? They take the Mandelbrot set.
Oh yeah.
And they zoom in, like that's just frequency. That's a visual sound you're looking at, right?
Yeah.
You know, like it's I don't know, it's mind blowing. And I love how beautiful the fractals are. Like, you know, and I bet you the prettiest music, if you were to map it out, probably looks pretty too.